Patrick Troughton, the biography of the second Doctor Who, read by his son, Michael Troughton. Introduction. Life depends on change and renewal. November the 5th, 1966, was a very special day for me. It was fireworks night. My girlfriend Vicky had just snogged me in the back garden, but best of all, my dad, Patrick Troughton, was about to become Doctor Who. I was 12, and he was 46. The previous Saturday, most of the family had huddled around our flickering black and white Cossa TV, waiting for the end of the final episode of The 10th Planet. "This old body of mine is wearing a bit thin," William Hartnell had gasped, before collapsing onto the cold TARDIS floor. We'd all shared in Ben and Polly's amazement as the old Doctor's face blurred, bleached white, and finally regenerated, with the help of high-tech special effects, giving way to a teasingly short glimpse of a very different man's features. Now, as distant cracks from rockets and Roman candles began to fill the Guy Fawkes evening air, I watched transfixed as the first episode of The Power of the Daleks was transmitted. My dad staggered to his feet and leant heavily on the TARDIS control panel, raising his hands to his face and feeling his features as if they belonged to a stranger. "Hold this! Tilt it!" he commanded Ben. A man with a Beatles-style mop of black hair, penetrating dark green eyes, and a pale putty-like face filled the screen. He stared childlike into an overly ornate silver-framed mirror and declared, "Life depends on change and renewal." For Patrick, as for the Doctor, life was about to change beyond all recognition. However, unlike the Doctor, who embraced his change with light-hearted indifference, my father found it very difficult to accept his new, very public role. He'd always been an extremely private man, who believed that acting was like being a magician. If you can see the cogs turning and the man inside the disguise, the illusion will collapse. He would always come out with this saying or something similar whenever he was asked to do an interview or make a public appearance as himself. He felt the actor and the role were two very different things, and the audience should never confuse them. He would wrestle uncomfortably with this problem for all of his career. My father was a complex man, but one thing was very clear. He had to act. He once confessed to me while working together on an episode of the 70s TV nursing drama Angels that acting was part of his being, something he had to do rather than had chosen. He likened the process of inhabiting another character in performance to a drug-like craving that seemed to keep my whole self in order. I can't imagine my world without it. It sparks me with life. Now, this is completely contrary to the way he mischievously described why he chose acting as a career during one of the very few public interviews he did as Doctor Who. "Oh, well, it's just a job like any other. I do it for the pennies, of course. I have a large family to feed and educate." In fact, life was a bit more complicated than Dad would like to admit in public, or even to close friends and colleagues. He had two families by the time he did Doctor Who. The first included his wife Margaret, with children Joanna, David and myself, who all lived in a large, cold, rambling house in Mill Hill, North London. And a second younger family consisting of his girlfriend Ethel, nicknamed Bunny, and children Jane, Peter and Mark, who lived in a bungalow in Kew, southwest London. I can't remember a moment in time during my early childhood when I first became aware that my dad had left my mother and fathered 3 more children, my half-brothers and sister. Well, there must have been one. A moment of stark, lonely panic which woke me in the night. A moment of sudden realization my life had changed forever. A moment when I fleetingly glimpsed my mother quietly sobbing to herself. But I don't think that moment ever happened for me. It never occurred to me at all. In fact, I accepted the situation of shared affection without questioning anything, far more than my brother or sister ever did. Perhaps this secret family also fueled Dad's obsession with privacy. It's a bizarre fact that his mother was never told about the family he lived with in Kew. We were all sworn to secrecy, visiting her with Dad and my mum every Christmas and Easter, as if we were all still one happy family. I assume Jane, Peter and Mark must never have met their grandmother. She died in 1979, never knowing the truth. Patrick lived through a time of many changes, including economic depressions, a world war, the sexual revolution, and the explosion of television entertainment. Throughout his life, change and renewal were to feature constantly, both in the artistic creation of characters for TV and in the complicated private life that he so wanted to keep secret. Chapter 1. Mummy's Boy. Patrick George Troughton was born in Mill Hill, London, on the 25th of March 1920. He was an ugly baby, judging from the faded sepia pictures that lie crumpled in my mother's old pigskin memorabilia suitcase in the attic. One photograph shows a baby in a black pram with dark spiky hair, a pinched forehead, and a very prominent pointed nose peering out of a starch white bonnet. I remember my Uncle Robin always teased Pat by telling everyone how shocked people were when they took a look in the pram. But by the time he was 4, pale, smooth skin, hooded green eyes, ink-black hair took control of his looks, and he began to develop into a thin but handsome young boy. His mother and father were a strange mix. Mr. Alec George Troughton was a nice old boy and looked a bit like a pirate, but was actually a highly respected lawyer. Mrs. Dorothy Evelyn Troughton had a distinct air about her and came over as rather grand, a bit of a ship in full sail and probably of the battle variety. She'd been a teacher in a boarding school in Cheshire before coming to London and settling in Edmonton with Alec. They were married in 1915 and after the Great War had settled in what then was a leafy and tranquil village of Mill Hill. Their house was a modest semi-detached property in Langley Park Drive, close to the station. Neither of Pat's parents or relations had any professional connection with the theatre. Pat was sent to nursery school at the age of 5, a privately owned kindergarten close to Mill Hill Broadway, run by a warm and friendly woman called Miss Webb. I think she must have been a failed dancer because most mornings were spent dancing and singing to music played on an old wind-up 78 record player. She followed the style of the infamous Isadora Duncan that included free and natural movements inspired by the classical Greek arts, folk dances, social dances, nature and natural forces, as well as athleticism, which included skipping, running, jumping, leaping and tossing. This must have inspired the young Pat so much that he was able to talk his mother into having ballet lessons under the guidance of a friend of hers, the film actress and ballet dancer Pearl Argyle, who would later star in the H.G. Wells film Things to Come. She'd studied with Rambert and Leggett and made her debut in 1926 with Rambert's company. Later, she would become the principal dancer with the Vic Wells Ballet, 1935-38. Pat sang and danced on a number of occasions in the local village hall by Mill Hill Church in front of an audience of doting parents. By all accounts, he was rather gifted with a great talent for artistic movement and had a voice that was clear and sweet. This opportunity that Pearl provided was his first ever experience of the thrill of a live show, and it must have enthused him so much that even from an early age a seed had been planted in his mind to become a performer of some sort. Pearl Argyle was one of the few right sorts of people that Pat's mother Dorothy desperately gravitated towards. They probably met at one of the many parties held by her husband's firm of shipping lawyers. Being from a lower middle-class background, Dot suffered dreadfully from an inferiority complex that tormented her all her life. Unhappy with her social position and constantly trying to better herself. This restless need to drag herself and her family towards the upper middle classes was to have a huge influence on young Pat's early life. On many occasions, she forbade him from playing in the park with the local working-class children, who he had befriended at nursery school. Well, she obviously felt they were not the right kind of people her son should be mixing with, and feared that they would have some irreversible influence on him. She employed a live-in maid, who it is alleged on more than one occasion sexually abused him in his bedroom. She encouraged strict dress code, especially at supper time. But worst of all for him, she insisted that he followed the traditional education route of all properly brought-up middle-class children, and attended a prestigious private school. So, at the age of 7, with his carefree ballet days behind him, he was packed off to a preparatory school in Bexhill-on-Sea. My father never talked to me about this time in his life, but I always sensed he could remember it all too clearly, young as he was. Bexhill-on-Sea boarding school must have been a lonely and frightening place for such a young child who'd enjoyed a happy, secure and comfortable home life up until this point. In fact, he was so unhappy, during his first year, after 3 terms of desperate letters pleading to come home, his mother finally relented and took him away from the school at Christmas. He continued his education at Belmont Preparatory School, which was in the grounds of Mill Hill Senior School. The headmaster, Arthur James Rooker Roberts, was an extremely compassionate man and had dedicated his entire life to setting up and running the school. He was a man with boundless energy and limitless vision, respected and adored by all his students, including the young Patrick. Unlike Bexhill-on-Sea, this school offered just what my father needed. The children were encouraged to stretch themselves academically, but also explore wider opportunities such as the arts and sport. The school was known for its family atmosphere, and my father thrived in its loving and caring ambience. It provided him with a true sense of belonging and encouragement on a consistent basis. In 1931, he became a weekday boarder at the senior school, and around the age of 14, he was bitten by the acting bug. I heard a radio programme about Faye Compton and was interested in what she had to say. She was the daughter of the actor-manager Edward. After drama school, she was so successful that she became known as the actress who was never out of work. She could play any role with utter sincerity, whether in Shakespeare, music hall, or modern drama. Well, the life she described appealed to me, and I felt I'd like that kind of life for myself. After winning a number of public speaking and poetry prizes, he plucked up courage and auditioned for a school production of HMS Pinafore. He was successful and was cast as Able Seaman Dick Deadeye. I had so much makeup on and this black patch over my eye. The wig was too big and kept falling across my face, so I could not see where I was going. I kept bumping into everything on stage. I mean, the audience loved it. And this was when I first realised how good it was to hear and feel that admiration from an audience. That feeling never left me. It's like a drug. You get fixed on it and you can't stop wanting it. The following year, he played the Pirate King in Gilbert and Sullivan's The Pirates of Penzance, and appeared as Wicked Thief in the school pantomime. Many other school productions followed, and by the age of 16, he decided that his future career was going to be as a performer. I just knew that is what I had to do. Robin was locked into a career with my father in the firm, but I was lucky. I could choose my own way. Robin was his brother. Patrick's mother and father seemed happy with his decision. However, they had all agreed that he must complete his education at Mill Hill in order that he had something to fall back on. In later years, Dad would say exactly the same to me. Although he had known that his father would back the decision to become an actor, he was surprised that his mother had allowed him free rein and had not insisted on a sensible profession. I'm unsure why my father found his mother's enthusiastic agreement strange. Perhaps he'd never realised that he was his mother's favourite and would always remain so. By the summer of 1938, he had sat and passed his London certificate, equivalent to GCSEs, in 8 subjects and achieved 2nd Division matriculation in 4 subjects at Higher London Certificate. He'd also distinguished himself as a member of Mill Hill School OTC, Officer Training Corps, showing good leadership skills and boundless energy on an end-of-term field day. In August 1938, he enrolled at the Embassy School of Acting in Swiss Cottage, which was then run by Eileen Thorndike, sister of the actress Dame Sybil Thorndike. He said she, had an instinctive skill for teaching, everything from Shakespeare to modern. She'd been a professional actress herself, and this brought a certain respect and truth to her teaching. Eileen was able to communicate an extraordinary love of the work in both the emotional and physical sides to the training, especially in Shakespeare classes. Pat was still able to live at home, which pleased his mother no end, and reduced the cost of his training quite substantially. He commuted every day back and forth from Mill Hill to Swiss Cottage along the A41 and Finchley Road, using the recently introduced new double-decker bus, the 113. The Embassy Theatre had opened in 1928, when Andrew Mather adapted the premises of the Hampstead Conservatoire. After 2 changes of control and the establishment of a Playgoers Association in 1930, the Embassy School of Acting opened there in 1932. The school provided a modern, but by now traditional course in acting based on the methods of the Russian practitioner and teacher Stanislavski. Classes took place in a studio attached to the embassy, and visiting lecturers included some of the top London actors and actresses of the period. At the same time, commercial productions were produced at the theatre that enabled my father to learn by watching other professionals. It was a real treat to see and be able to talk to such actors as Michael Redgrave, Constance Cummings, Glynis Jones, Sybil Thorndike and Mabel Love. It felt like we were being taught by the best, and that really excited us into committing ourselves to the work. Patrick kept a detailed diary during 1939 of his last term at the Embassy School. Every rehearsal, movement class and singing lesson was recorded and duly commented on. He began the new term rehearsing a play called The Boy David. Monday the 2nd of January 1939. Got my copy of play of maybe more than 7 and 6. Ask father to help. Rehearsals this afternoon were very long and my cold is worse. Hoarse voice. Going well though. Learnt my words more quickly than ever before. Finished at 4:30 and went to see The Lady Vanishes with Robin and Peggy. Extremely good. Tuesday the 24th of January 1939. Tatty dress rehearsal. Too slow on cues. Luckily, Miss Thorndike mentioned it to me after the first act. I benefited from it and picked it up. I think I shall be good. Costumes are superb. Grand makeup. Miss Thorndike is getting me a letter of introduction to Tyrone Guthrie. Tuesday the 14th March 1939. Richard II went very well. Best thing I've ever done yet. Eileen pleased. I found the way to be emotional in a pleasing way. Before, it was all horrid. Emotional memory is the right way to get feeling. Eileen wants father to see her. The possibility becomes probability. America. Tuesday the 4th April 1939. First night of Black Eye. Colossal success! Carried it off 77 times better than I could have ever imagined, and in front of all my friends and relations, everyone. And in the face of awful odds. The weather, my cold, violent nosebleed beforehand. My father began to shine in the many productions at the school and started to get the reputation for being able to play older than his age. Sean Sutton, who was later to become head of serials at the BBC during Pat's time on Doctor Who, was also a student at the embassy in 1938. They became firm, lifelong friends. Sean described Pat's looks in those days. Well, I'd actually been a drama student with Patrick Troughton many years ago, before the war, and even back then, Patrick had those deep lines on his face. He had the look of a 1,000-year-old leprechaun, and I remember saying to him once, "Pat, you have the secret of eternal age." Pat also met his first girlfriend, Cynthia, at the embassy. She was a fellow student and lived in Totteridge, quite near to Mill Hill. She features quite heavily in his diary entries. "Cynthia sent me her photograph today. Oh, she is really jolly pretty. She phoned me yesterday to say she'd got an audition for Windsor. Cynthia phoned soon after breakfast to thank me for her birthday telegram. I am taking her to lunch tomorrow, and then to a film. I kissed a girl for the first time today. My Cynthia." We both laughed afterwards. I think I'm in love. Auditions for last play today. Hope Cynthia and I get good parts. The final production of the term was A Midsummer Night's Dream, and Pat was cast as Bottom. I remember him explaining that he had a very heavy head cold during the short run of the show, and unfortunately they had insisted that he wore an extremely close-fitting and heavy ass head for the scene with Titania. Well, every time I came off, I had to literally drain the mask. I could have drowned in my own snot if I had left it. The whole head just kept filling up because of my streaming cold. Pat remembered being disappointed on the last night that his final scene had not gone so well. The famous Pyramus and Thisbe scene that is supposed to bring the house down. On this night, however, the audience was particularly subdued, and Pat had felt a little depressed with his performance, blaming himself for the lack of reaction. In the audience that night, unbeknownst to him, was a director of the American Leighton Rowling's studio, who was scouting for students from England to complete a summer scholarship at their John Drew Memorial Theatre in East Hampton, Long Island, New York. The following day, he was contacted by Eileen to say that he had been offered a chance to audition for one of the prestigious limited places. My father leapt at the chance and quickly began preparing a couple of speeches. From Shakespeare, he chose Hamlet and the famous speech where Fortinbras arrives to greet King Claudius but encounters the deadly scene. Gertrude, Claudius, Laertes, and Hamlet are all dead. Horatio asks to be allowed to recount the tale of the yet unknowing world, and Fortinbras orders Hamlet's body borne off in honour. There's no record of his second piece. In a letter to his mother and father, he described the audition and how his nerves almost got the better of him. When my turn came, I literally could not stand up. My legs felt numb and my throat was dry as a brush. I staggered to the centre of the stage and stared into the glaring working lamps. Somehow I just began. I don't know how, but it was like being outside my body. I suddenly felt calm and in control, and I hummed through that verse without a single fluff or quaver in my voice. But it must have been good, because when I'd finished, everybody in the theatre applauded loudly. But I can't even remember acting it. It's a complete blank. Pat won the summer scholarship, and went out to America the following month. Leighton Rawlings was Boston born and bred, and very much out of the old school of theatre. His staff also came out of that mould, the classic theatre, actors and actresses that meant something then, but have disappeared into obscurity now. It was a dedicated group that in some ways was way ahead of its time. Rawlings has started his career as an English teacher, but quickly discovered that theatre was his calling, and he joined the Repertory Theatre of Boston, where he became the director's general assistant. Aged 26, Leighton moved to New York and became a PA and drama lecturer. While there, he saw many young struggling actors, so in 1929 he founded one of the earliest summer festival theatres in the United States. In 1934, he opened and ran the theatre school for 10 years called Leighton Rawlings Studio in East Hampton, New York. My father described his time during the summer of 1939 as a happy and wonderful experience. We did a lot of plays there, as well as a lot of hard work in our studies. It was a wonderful time. However, these 8 weeks were more than just fun and hard work. They were to have a profound effect on my father as an actor. Here would be the foundation on which all his ideas, techniques, and philosophy of acting would blossom and develop. The beginning of a process that would continue throughout his life. The school had a number of very experienced teachers, but the one my father gravitated towards was a Russian called Leo Bulgakov, a former director and actor of the Moscow Arts Theatre. He had worked under Stanislavski on many occasions, and his teaching reflected the methods that this famous practitioner had developed. On the first day at the Long Island studio, my father was posed the question, I am an actor. My job is to appear to be someone else, but I cannot actually be someone else. So, if I can only be myself, how do I create and present a character whom an audience accepts as fully rounded, but who is not me? In order to answer this, Pat would be introduced to the system, a collection of ideas and techniques set out to solve the problem through a study of acting, actors, and real life. More than any other influence on his career, this was to be the most vital, the moment in time that would form a basis for his strengths as a deeply emotional actor. An artist who could work effortlessly from the emotional inside of a character to the physical outside. An actor who listened, reacted, and appeared at all times real. He would learn to move from the real I to the dramatic I. In later years, my dad always made light of the creative process of acting, saying that there was nothing to it but saying the lines and not bumping into the furniture. The most important thing he told me was to make sure before you went on, you checked your flies. He always skirted around the process of rehearsal with the comments, "Oh, I just do it. I don't know how, I don't want to. If you think too much about it, you destroy the illusion for yourself and thus the audience." He would never admit it, but those instinctive rules he worked with had been instilled in him during that summer of 1939. His diary entries reflect how happy he was at this time. Most perfect day. Leo and Mrs. Pole have told me grand things about my acting. From them it's a compliment indeed, working all day. Act 5 tonight. Oh, was ever a boy as happy as I? Happy because he was, to his surprise, doing a job well. My play Fashion is a roaring success. I was clapped on exit for the longest time ever last night. Mr. Leighton and Shirley were very pleased with me. Shirley says I'm a second Claude Rains. They're hinting about jobs and there may be a contract. Rehearsals for Pygmalion went well today. Leo says I have a very good line on Doolittle. Must know Act 2 by tomorrow if I have to stay up all night. Talk to Leighton. He criticised me for being too much in my own mind about things. Am I? He did say, though, that he had seen 12 bottoms at the school, and he'd liked mine the best. Doolittle. Best job I've done. Got laughs on nearly every line because I didn't force it. Eileen saw it and said it was my best job yet. I've now a succession of successes as a backbone. I ought now to go ahead from here, if I am careful. I was good tonight, because I just didn't care. The course was very hard work, but every Sunday was free, and Pat was able to explore the local area. The coastal strip had been badly affected by a powerful hurricane the year before, and evidence of its destructive forces was everywhere, especially in East Hampton, where the reconstruction of local houses and sea defences was still not complete. Pat spent many afternoons walking along the huge East Hampton sand dunes and was invited by a newly acquired American friend at the studio to play golf for the first time at the rather exclusive Maidstone Golf Club. By all accounts, his first encounter with the game was not particularly skillful, but a lifelong love of the sport obviously stuck. Life was good, and Pat was very happy. But then darkness fell across Europe. The day we broke up, we listened to Neville Chamberlain announcing that we had declared war on Germany. Well, I just couldn't believe it. It all seemed so far away. Pat immediately contacted his father by telegram, insisting he should come home at once and cancel the arranged 3-week holiday exploring the East Coast. His father agreed and managed to obtain a ticket for him through his New York office aboard the Belgian cargo ship Alex van Opstal, sailing on the 6th of September 1939 to Antwerp. The Alex van Opstal that belonged to the Maritime Belge had a crew of 49 and only 8 passengers on board. Its planned route included an unscheduled stop at Weymouth for a routine inspection, and my father had asked to be put ashore at that point. The cargo vessel only had a top speed of 16 knots, which made the transatlantic voyage longer than usual. During the journey, he befriended a Belgian woman called Madame Andre, who tried to teach him a variety of card games. Pat wrote, Thursday, the 7th of September, 1939. On the high seas, glorious day. I've bathed in the canvas swimming pool, sea porpoises, sea turtle, and a whale. I listened to the news from the BBC, heard that German submarines were sinking British shipping. Oh, it's good to rest for a while after such hard work. Spent the evening, as night fell, watching the stars come out at the stern. Saturday the 9th of September 1939. There's a big swell today. I played shuffleboard and bathed, feeling a bit dull and tired. Played chess with the commander. He beat me. I played well, though. Ran into fog. Sunday the 10th of September 1939. Making 16 knots. Very large swell. We are rolling and pitching a great deal. I hope the Belgian lady is better. She was very seasick. Had party tonight, and I turned in at about 12, a bit tight. Others carried on until 4:30 and made such a racket. Monday the 11th of September 1939. We are halfway across. The Belgian lady is well again, and is at this moment talking to old Howdy-Do, a Texan man. Played chess with the captain, won a game. Had beer, and went to bed a bit tight again. Wednesday the 13th of September 1939. Feeling better today. Played bridge with Madame Andre. By the 15th of September 1939, the ship had arrived just south of Portland, when, at 5:55 p.m., there was an explosion near the number 2 hatch. She lifted 6 to 7 feet out of the water as a result, fell back and broke her back between the front of the bridge and the number 3 hold. It's thought that she hit a mine. My father kept the newspaper report of the sinking, which makes dramatic reading. Captain Del Gosse said that 7 people were injured and are in hospital. The ship was blown up and sank about 6:40 p.m. The passengers and all the crew were taken off in lifeboats, and the Greek steamer Atlantikos picked them up. A seaplane came over and reported their position, and boats afterwards came out and took both crew and passengers off the Atlantikos. First aid was given on board one of the boats, and then another boat came alongside with a doctor and stretchers. Everyone had been put ashore before midnight. Asked if he had seen any submarines, the captain said, "Well, we saw nothing. All I know is there was a terrific explosion near number 2 hatch, and the ship broke in two in front of the bridge. The sea was rather rough with a northerly wind, but visibility was good. One of my passengers, Madame Andre, a Belgian woman from New York, was among the injured, and is in a hotel with one of her ribs broken." The assistant engineer on the vessel, Alfred Thorne, said, "Well, I was in the engine room when there was a fearful crash. We were plunged into darkness, and fuel oil began spurting all over us. There were shouts that we'd been sunk. Well, we went up on deck and found the ship had been cut clean in two. We went into the lifeboats and pulled over the Greek ship. We understood from the Greeks that they had seen a submarine. We escaped in what we were standing in, and the passengers, like ourselves, lost everything. Several of the crew were injured, including the radio operator, Guylan, who is in hospital with a broken leg and arm. Our best cargo boat on the Antwerp-New York service has gone. She'd only been running 2 years." My father was uninjured, but badly shaken up by the incident. He'd been in his cabin when the explosion occurred and witnessed the whole ship lift out of the water. One of the crew members had banged loudly on his door and had bellowed to get out on deck to muster stations. After the rescue, he stayed the night at the Weymouth Hotel, thankful that his life had been spared, but having lost all his possessions, everything but the wet clothes on his back. It turns out that he had been rather the hero that evening, helping the injured Madame Andre into a lifeboat and going back to assist other passengers before clambering aboard himself. He sustained a nasty gash to his forehead as he was thrown to the cabin floor during the explosion, but managed to stop the bleeding with his handkerchief and a pair of underpants, which he tied securely around his head. The sinking was big news at the time, and the Belgian magazine Ons Volk ran it as their front cover. Dad used to look at this front cover that hung as a poster on our upstairs loo and swear blind that the front passenger in the brown blanket, looking very heroic, was him. I was never quite sure whether he was telling the truth or just pulling my leg. It is clear, however, that my father only just escaped with his life, and if the Greek steamer had not been within hailing distance, things could have been a lot worse. Pat's diary entry for that fateful day reads, "Torpedoed off Portland. Took to boats, Greek steamer stood by and took us on board. Then taken ashore by paddle steamer. All saved, including Blackie, captain's dog. Some of the crew hurt badly. Admiralty treating us to hotel for the night. Phoned Dad. Mother meeting me tomorrow at Waterloo. Ship sank." The next day he wrote, "Rather a restless night. Limbs ached and head hurt. Staying at hotel in Weymouth, very hungry. All my money safe. All else gone. Had superb breakfast of bacon and egg and English tea. At Lloyd's called and saw I was okay. I caught the 11:10 after wiring home. We are at Southampton. I am in the guard's van. We get in at 4:10. Very weary. Want food when I get to London." When Patrick returned to Mill Hill, he immediately announced to his father that he intended to volunteer for the Navy. His father was delighted at the prospect of his son following the family's traditional route of going to sea at time of war, but he had to explain to the enthusiastic and patriotic Patrick that he was too young to qualify for a place at that time. On the outbreak of the Second World War, Parliament had passed the National Service Armed Forces Act, under which all men between 18 and 41 were to be made liable for conscription. But the registration that was to begin on the 21st of October 1939 was only for those aged 20 to 23. Pat was going to have to be patient and wait for his call-up papers. He was bitterly disappointed. However, in late November, he auditioned and was accepted for a season at the Tonbridge Repertory Theatre under the direction of the famous playwright Christopher Fry. It was a semi-professional company called the County Players, situated in Avebury Avenue, where a health club now stands. This was Pat's first ever paid acting job, and it went some way to taking his mind off the sense of futility that everyone shared in, that nothing was going to last for very long. "I feel like a proper actor for the first time in my life," he told his mother. "We're doing a wonderful play by John Willard called The Cat and the Canary. You should come and see it with Father. It is a mix of comedy and horror." But by December, Patrick had suddenly started to question his love of the stage. In his diary he writes, "I intend giving up the stage. Oh, it is too much of a strain on my nerves, and it obliterates family life, which is very dear to me. I shall give a fortnight's notice. No more acting for me. I do love it, but I am not prepared to make it my life's work. I think I'm satisfied that I have shown I no longer fear acting after my big dry. But no more. My next job in hand is fighting the war." Despite penning these thoughts, all through the spring and summer of 1940, Pat continued to perform Shakespeare, modern plays, and a number of productions written by Fry, all in fortnightly repertoire. It was hard work, but it offered the opportunity of playing parts that Patrick would normally never have been offered, such as Hamlet and Romeo. Although these rewarding and challenging parts helped quell his impatience to fight for his country, the war was never far from his mind, and in late September he experienced its terrifying reality for the second time, when a solitary German bomber released a carpet of 44 bombs over Tonbridge, in a straight line from Connaught Way to Great Culverden Park, and then again from the hospital to Grosvenor Road. 12 people were killed that night and 16 were injured. Hundreds of houses all over the centre of town were damaged. The hospital was hit too, with its casualty ward being put out of action. Pat had sheltered in the basement of the theatre during the attack, but a number of the cast were injured, one seriously. The season ended in August, and the theatre closed for the duration of the war. Fry proclaimed himself a pacifist, and spent the war first as a fireman and then clearing out sewage from the docks in Portsmouth. One of the Tonbridge Repertory actors was arrested by the police and taken away as a suspected enemy alien. He was never seen again. Patrick returned to Mill Hill to await his call-up. It was November 1940 when Patrick met my mother, Margaret Dunlop, for the first time. A friend of hers explains, "Oh, Margaret was tall and slim, with bright blue eyes and shoulder-length hair. A picture of health. She was a golden girl and extremely popular amongst her group. Although we lived near to each other in Mill Hill, I think I first met Pat at the time he began to court Margaret, to use a very old-fashioned term. Margaret was a near neighbour of ours and a great friend of my older brother, Michael. They were both part of a group of young people who had formed their own social circle and who enjoyed energetic outdoor activities such as cycling and swimming. Certainly in Margaret and Michael's case, they also enjoyed going to the cinema and, whenever possible, the theatre. In the winter of 1940, after the war had started, Margaret and Michael threw a party for their friends shortly before they would be called up to serve in the forces. The dance was held in the hall of my school, Goodwin in Mill Hill, where Margaret would later become a temporary teacher. They'd laid on a buffet, a pianist, and a gramophone with records of all the latest dance hits. It's not clear who had invited Patrick to the party, but I don't think before then he had featured much in the lives of the group. Most of them had been to UCS school, and Pat, of course, had been to Mill Hill. He was, in any event, rather different, a flamboyant loner, rather wary, and a touch sardonic, 3 or 4 years older than them, and already out in the world, and with saturnine good looks as well. An intriguing character all round. Some time after the dance, I remember Michael coming back from visiting the Dunlops and reporting that Pat Troughton had been there, sitting at Margaret's feet, reading poetry to her. Well, Michael was rather put out by this turn of events, especially as Margaret seemed to be enjoying it. Pretty soon we all realised that Pat was a now permanent fixture in her life. The new year saw Patrick visiting the Dunlop household on a regular basis, with more poetry, visits to the theatre or cinema, and country bike rides. My mother described those few early weeks of courting as a truly idyllic and romantic time that neither of us wanted to forget. Pat and Margaret were to become firm friends and lovers over the months that followed, marred only by the darkness of war that began to close in all around them.